Hi, this is Adam Eliel Berkowitz from Israel 365, coming to you live from the Golan. I have a really amazing guest today, another one of those people I just like to listen to and speak to. I'm speaking to Dr. Scott Stripling. Dr. Stripling, he's discovered the site of the Tabernacle in Shilo. He's the provost and professor of biblical archaeology and church history at the Bible Seminary in Katy, Houston, Texas. He directs the ABR excavations at ancient Shilo, and he's on the board of directors for the Near East Archaeological Society. And just in case you don't know, Shilo was the major Israelite worshiping center before the first temple was built in Jerusalem. It's where the tabernacle stood for, I think it was 400 years, the tabernacle?
A little over 3 centuries, I think. The Mishnah gives us the 369 number, so somewhere over 3 centuries.
I want to preface the conversation with Dr. Stripling. He is a man of both massive faith and massive science. And that's a powerful combination, which is why I really like speaking to him. The Bible is being revealed through archaeology, or vice versa. And that's what he spends his time doing, which is amazing. So Dr. Stripling, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about Shilo. You said something the last time we spoke about it. I asked you straight up, I said, are you positive that the tabernacle stood at Shilo? And you're like, 100%. So this is really heavy stuff. So tell me about Shilo and how you know that the tabernacle was there.
Well, I must have really been feeling good that day. Okay. Thanks for having me on your show. Well, Shilo was established about 1750 BC. And so you go through a Canaanite period. You have an Israelite arrival at the end of LB1, say around 1400. We see a change in the material culture around that time. And by that, I mean, like, we analyze the faunal deposits, you know, the bone remains, and we can see what percentage, how their diet changes and so forth. We see ceramic changes that take place also. And we're in a process of reanalyzing all the pottery from the previous digs that took place there. And they're very positively pointing to a synchronization with the biblical text. We have storage rooms that are unique really to Shilo. No other site in Israel has this phenomenon where we appear, at least in the area that we've excavated so far, to have storage rooms lining the inside perimeter of the site.
Similar to what was eventually in the temple.
Well, yeah, just think about it. When people were going to give their tithe in biblical times, they couldn't go to like tabernacle.org and make a secure online donation. You know, they brought commodity. And so that's what we would call verisimilitude. It's a consistency between what we read in the document and what we find in the material culture. We have found altar horns, ceramic pomegranates, which are a type of the tabernacle culture as well. The bone deposits are very important and very interesting, and we have some large monumental.
All kosher animals.
Yes, it's about 4% pig bone, for example, pre-Israelite, and less than 1% post-Israelite, and that less than 1% could be contamination, or it could just be some guy who just couldn't resist.
It happens in modern Israel. Yeah.
So we have wild boar here in Israel, and they were just trying to get rid of them so they wouldn't mess up their gardens or something like that.
Yeah.
You also, last time we spoke, you said that the pomegranates, it's not just a pretty little ornament. Apparently it had special significance. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've got a replica right here in front of me, as a matter of fact, of the one that we excavated. And of the 7 sacred fruits when they came into the land, remember, God had told them, you're going to have dates, figs, grapes, and so forth, and pomegranates. But it was only the pomegranate that went into the presence of God. And you can see the bulb on it, what's called the calyx on the bottom, where it flowers out. But the one that we found was a little bit larger than this. This is a replica. So we have 2 actually so far. And the important thing is that the Bible indicates that from the hem of the priest's garments, you have bells and pomegranates. Mm-hmm. And so now what are we finding? pomegranate. So it's, and you only find, these have been found at other sites in Israel, Yokneam, for example, but only at Levitical sites. And also in Solomon's temple, the Bible tells us that there were 200 pomegranates that adorned Solomon's temple. So yeah, it's altar horns, it's pomegranates, it's bone deposit, it's storage rooms. All of this together sort of inductively gives us a picture of what life was like in biblical times there.
One of the most famous finds over here where I live by the city of David is a golden pomegranate with a bell inside of it.
Right.
Which definitely
right.
What you
and that's very significant because we know, of course, that ultimately the Ark of the Covenant, the temple, the tabernacle ends up in Jerusalem, and that bell was found with wet sifting. And this is what we have revolutionized at Shilo. So we are the first ones to do on-site wet sifting in situ. Now, fortunately, from the city of David, they sent some selected loci to a site to be wet sifted, and they could identify that. We're wet sifting 100% of our material on site in situ so that we miss nothing. And in my view, this is just too important to make a mistake. So it takes us more time and it costs us more money, but I don't want at the end to have any regrets.
You also mentioned you found the horns of the altar. That's pretty astounding.
Well, in 2019, this was sort of the biggest highlight find for us. 3 horns from a 4-horned altar, and this was in a context where we've been finding other cultic material, like the pomegranates, for example. And it was some of it's in a sealed locus. And this is very important because I carbon dated that material. And before the results came back, I estimated based on the ceramic typology, because we knew what the pottery was reading above this plastered floor and below this plastered floor. And I said, it's going to come back at about 1075 BC. And so we all took bets on this. And fortunately, I was right. It was 1060 plus or minus 30. And so apparently this is the Philistine destruction of Shilo that's alluded to in the Hebrew Bible, but it's never stated, like Psalm 78, for example, and 1 Samuel 4. So here we have horns from an altar at a place where the Bible says that the altar stood, with other cultic material nearby. So in the coming seasons, it's going to be really interesting to see what we find.
Do you see the remnants of ash like you do here? There's a layer of ash with the destruction of the temple?
A very thick layer of ash that this is found in. So it's 12 to 18 inches that it undulates through. And we have a collard rim jar mixed in there, a classic Israelite collard rim jar. So
is that the picture that we have here?
Actually, this one, that's a very interesting question. This is Second Temple period, or actually this is Bar Kokhba period. So this would be 2nd century CE or AD. And it does have a collar on it. So we can call this a collared rim, but it's from a very different period than the classic iron one.
It's funny. I know that I've had people say to me, there's never been any real archaeology done on the Temple Mount. So people will say there's no proof that there was a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount. Yeah. Right. It's said, and it's kind of, it is a harsh statement that is, it's very incredible. It's difficult to hear.
But arguments from silence are always difficult because it's difficult to disprove them. And so when we're asking the question, is the Bible a reliable historical document? Well, I take the literature from Mesopotamia, the literature from Egypt as reliable. I'm taking a look at that and saying, does the material culture match up with that? And when we do that, we have to ask ourselves, do we have a presupposition of innocence or guilt? And so I'm sort of assuming that the biblical text is accurate, and others may be assuming that it's not based on their presuppositions. So then how can we be scientific? So then let's test the hypothesis. And so as we continue to day after day test the hypothesis, we find indeed that the Bible is a very reliable historical document.
Much more reliable than the UNESCO resolution saying that the Temple Mount.
This actually, I don't know if people who are seeing this are aware of the context of what you just said. People may not be aware. I think there's a real actual battle going on in Israel. It's like, I remember when I went to build my house, I had to get some kind of permit saying that there was no archaeology under my house, because this is Israel. You dig a hole, you're probably going to hit something from the biblical period,
right?
And at the same time, there's a battle going on in the world of archaeology in Israel. One side actually says that it's almost downplaying their position when they say the Bible is not an accurate source. One I know that Dr. Yisrael Finkelstein, who is and has been for a long time one of the major figures in Israeli archaeology, he actually said there never was a King David, which is, and this is you obviously having at least a civil conversation with Yisrael Finkelstein. And he said there was no King David, and he kind of still maintains that, even though there is irrefutable proof, references from outside of Israel. Which stele was it? There was that mentions King David, and
the House of David stele from Dan,
right? But I find that to be unusual, because I thought that the British and the Europeans came to Israel 150 years ago with Bible in hand, to find their way around, and to find the relics, and to find the artifacts and the remnants. And now all of a sudden we're told that the Bible is absolutely, I mean, to say that they don't see it's credible, they see it as ridiculous and not connected to reality at all. And I see you as in the forefront, battling against that with science, with the science of archaeology.
Can I just interrupt and say that the revisionist history is alive and well also all over the United States, and those that claim that the founding fathers of the U.S. Were not religious in any way, and they didn't believe in God. And when the Constitution itself mentions the Creator with a capital C, and obviously every bill that is printed in the United States is "In God We Trust," and every Congress and every court that is started invokes God's name. So to say that it is devoid of God is obviously revisionist history.
Right, but to go up to the Temple Mount and then say that there never was a Jewish temple there, to go to Shilo and see all these amazing artifacts that you found and say, that's just a story. King David, okay, that's a little bit different. How do you see this battle? Is it a real battle?
Oh, absolutely. It is. What we've tried to do is to engage in this arena of ideas and say, hey, let's mix it up. What we're finding is consistent with the biblical text, and there seems to be a bias against that type of research. So let's not make this about personalities or anything like that. Let's just engage in the arena of ideas. And when you saw Israel and I walking together and talking, I mean, I find him to be a very engaging and personable person. We're just approaching the subject very different presuppositionally. Jokingly, I mean, my team was there, but it's funny. This was actually what is today, January 4th. It was about January the 4th when that was taken. We were finishing a winter project 8, 9, 10 years ago. And we went to Megiddo. I had maybe 15, 20 people who were left behind. So we all went to Megiddo. We were the first ones there. And I'm giving them a talk at the bottom of the hill about minimalism and maximalism. And I'm mentioning who Finkelstein is. And he's sort of the leader of this school of thought. And now, mind you, the place has just opened and it's a cold January morning. And I look over, and not 20 or 30 feet from me, there is Israel with a small group of people that he's talking to. And I tell my group, you're not going to believe this, but there's Israel right there. And the way I had described him, I guess they thought he was going to have horns or something. But yeah, I went over, we of course had a nice talk, but he had his family there from out of town and he was showing them around. So I jokingly said to my group that we were going to have at Megiddo, we were going to go into the Valley of Armageddon there and have one final cataclysmic apocalyptic battle to settle the issue of minimalism and maximalism once and for all.
Could you explain the difference between minimalism and maximalism?
Okay, so a maximalist sees the Bible as innocent until proven guilty, and a minimalist sees it as guilty until proven innocent.
So he says that the Bible is not necessarily accurate until we prove it accurate.
I'm not going to believe one fact unless you can prove it to me without doubt.
Does he look at other historical sources in the same light?
No. That's the funny thing.
Right.
Is they'll give a presumption of innocence to Ugaritic literature or the Amarna letters or whatever, Egyptian and Mesopotamian literature. It's the Bible that's always presumed to be guilty.
Yeah, which is strange because you mentioned somebody like Josephus, for example, and he mentions the Bible himself. So he's recognizing the Bible, but they're not recognizing. They can recognize Josephus, but not him recognizing the Bible.
Well, they would say that he was writing propaganda. He was being paid by the Romans, and he was an apologist for Rome. He was trying to give the Jewish perspective of history, but his patron was clearly the Vespasian dynasty. So that's.
But you would think that after you get a couple good hits from biblical sources, you would give it more credence, you would think.
The Bible is our go-to source for that part of the world. Listen, Shilo is not mentioned in the Egyptian literature. It's not mentioned in Mesopotamian literature. It's mentioned in the Bible. And so that's our go-to source. When these artifacts come out of the ground that we're carefully excavating, they're mute, okay? They're not saying anything. They have to be interpreted. And the only way that we can interpret them is with a broad understanding of the material culture regionally. We've been excavating in the highlands of Israel for 40 years now. So we have a broad understanding of the material culture there, and we have a text that describes that. I think we'd be foolish to, we've got a dialogue, how foolish we would be to remove the text from the discussion.
Several weeks ago, I was in. Sorry to interrupt, Leo. I was in the synagogue on Sabbath, and there was a discussion afterwards in practical modern day Jewish law whether it is permissible to visit the site. Yeah, I'm sure that you'll find this interesting. The site of the excavations of Tel Shilo. Because if the altar is indeed there, we are not allowed. It is holy, and we're not allowed to step on the altar. We're not. And so, if we don't know exactly where the altar was, then we're not allowed. We're not permitted to visit that site because we don't know if we would be accidentally stepping on this holy article.
Wow. I remember. I've been very privileged to speak to Eilat Mazar a few times. And she's another one of my favorite people. Mm-hmm. And I don't think she's personally religious, at least not in the classical sense. But from the sense of archaeology, she would agree with you. Use the Bible as a source. And she's had astounding results. She finds stuff like crazy. So, I mean, eventually, I think in the world of proof, you're going to win out just because you'll be successful in finding stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, but here's how she's then talked about behind her back.
Right.
That woman who calls herself an archaeologist, for example, how condescending can we be? And the thing is, we're not that way. You've heard me speaking respectfully today about Israel Finkelstein. Mm-hmm. We're not that way. And what she did is she took the Bible and she reading in the Hebrew Bible that David was in his palace when the Philistines attacked Jerusalem, and he descended into the fortress of Zion. Yered Metzilot Zion, I believe it says. He descended into the fortress of Zion. So she said, well, if the palace was above the fortress, then we know where the fortress was, then it should be here. Well, I mean, it turns out that you've got this large stone structure where the Bible indicated that there should be one. There's not going to be a sign that says David lived here,
Right.
But we have a consistency between what you would expect to find and what you find.
We do consistently find seals with names on them, which are specifically mentioned in the Bible. So we know that these characters were not just mythical characters; they were real people.
Well, that's right. And another thing that she found that was really interesting is in the Ophel excavation, what is apparently an archival copy of an Amarna letter. So she published this in 2010. And so we have all these famous Amarna letters that are talking about the king of Jerusalem. Okay. But then skeptics would come back and say, well, Jerusalem was not inhabited at that time. And this just makes me laugh because back in Amarna, someone forged 1400 years ago or whatever, someone forged this and, hid it in Amarna. And now you have a fragment of an archival copy on the Ophel. The thing is that in a place like Jerusalem, especially in the epicenter there, they would often scrape down to bedrock when they were going to rebuild. And so you don't find that stratification. It's often scraps that were piecing together. But you've got an ancient document like the Amarna letters that talks about the king of Jerusalem. I think you can safely say that there was a king of Jerusalem.
Yeah, and she finds, and she's so careful. I remember she found one seal, and I forget who she said attributed it to, but it was missing one letter. And because of that one letter, she said, well, we can't say definitively. I mean, in general, archaeologists talking to them could be a little bit frustrating because they'll take you right up to the door. And it's like, because they're working with clues. They're working with clues that are thousands of years old. And they'll say, well, we have this and this and this. And you'll be like, so that means this. No, 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 no.
Well, you know why is because then if we stick our neck out, our colleagues, you start catching shrapnel from the side. So you try to be careful. For example, you know, we're pretty confident that we are in this tabernacle matrix, if I can use that term, at Shilo right now. So, you know, check with me in another 12 months, God willing, that we're back in the field this summer. And we may have something that I might stick my neck out a little further on.
Jan from Facebook is saying that you should keep digging, discover Bible truth, shalom, keep the seed covenant. I'm curious, what's going on with Corona, and are you being prohibited from continuing your work because of the current restrictions?
We were not able to dig this last summer just simply because Israel was closed, and we're hoping that the vaccinations work their way through the U.S. population to an extent that we're able to dig this summer. We moved our dig. Normally we're at the beginning of the summer. We moved it to the end of the summer to give us a little bit of extra time. But I was actually there this time last year. January 6th is when I flew out. We did a winter project. And so we may have been the last sort of outside group to do any work before the country closed down. But yeah, God willing, we'll be back in the field this summer.
I have a question. I always ask you, you know, you're a man of deep faith, and your faith is clearly part of your work. But there was, you know, for thousands of years, people had to accept the Bible strictly on faith. I'm wondering how does archaeology and your finds and being knee deep in the dust of the Bible, how does that affect your faith?
Well, I would say in a very profound sense, but not that it made me a believer, but a sense of satisfaction in seeing that. Sort of like I'm a grandfather now. I get a great sense of satisfaction from having my 4 grandchildren, you know, sitting in my lap. But I didn't need that to know that I was the patriarch of my family or that I was the dad, or my identity didn't come from that. But a great sense of satisfaction did. And as we dig, like Psalm 102:14 says, "Oh, Zion, blessed are those who love your dust and cherish your stones." I mean, that's how I feel about the work that we're doing. I think this is sacred soil, and it's talking to me. You know, the stones are talking to me, the pottery's talking to me, the bones are talking to me, the scarabs. You know, it's all kind of inductively coming together. Think about it. Someone could be speaking to you fluently, but if you didn't know that language, you wouldn't understand anything. And so the language of the material culture, the more that we're able to facilitate it and work with it, it's giving us a story of what life was like in antiquity in biblical times.
So it's not, I mean, I feel kind of weird because a lot of times I'll write an article and it'll be like, oh, this new archaeological find proves Isaiah, you know, but yeah. I feel like I don't really want to do that. I don't want to prove the Bible.
Well, the Bible sells, you know, let's face it. And we take the 2 seals, say the Hezekiah and Isaiah bulla that were found within a few feet of each other. That's pretty significant. I mean, around 700.
Didn't one of them have a thumbprint?
Yes. And in fact, we have at Shilo, we have a bulla that I haven't published yet that also has a thumbprint on it. So, you know, this is when you start talking about the human aspect of it. These were real people in real places, and you know, you start seeing fingerprints or trinkets, bracelets. Like I excavated some human remains once, and the little girls had bracelets still on their wrist, and like a little doll that was nearby. And this is over 3,000 years old. you're thinking, these were real people just like us, aspirations, dreams, doubts, fears. In this case, there had been an earthquake and a wall had toppled a wall and it had, crushed them. So
what is your
human
response?
aspect.
What is your response? I don't know if this has happened or just theoretically, if you were to find something which seems to contradict the Bible, what would be your response then?
I mean, that certainly does happen or can happen because we've got partial evidence. I mean, we're only beginning to compile the evidence, but you have to be really, really careful. And as a scholar, go back and check the results yourself. So, for example, some of the things that Finkelstein reported from his excavation at Shilo, I'm sure that based on their understanding, he was reporting it the best that he could, but there were a couple of things, for example, that seemed to contradict the biblical account that now we have found the opposite, and even in his own data. Would you like an example or two?
Was at Shilo before you?
Yeah, Finkelstein dug for 4 seasons, shows you the importance of the site back in the 1980s, and then the Danish were there for 4 seasons back in the 1920s and 1930s. So take, for example, the Iron II period at Shilo. So the Bible indicates that there were people living at Shilo during the Iron Age II period. Finkelstein says virtually nobody was there. We only got a little bit of Iron II pottery. And we found the opposite. We have squares right next to the squares that he dug. We have more Iron II than we have Iron I. And the salvage work that the Kamat, the civil administration, has done, they have found the same thing too. So you seem to be saying that archaeology contradicted the Bible, but when we went back and checked, and then we went through his dump pile last winter, I wet sifted his dump piles from the 1980s, and there was all the Iron II pottery there. So that's my answer to your question. Something seems to contradict the Bible. Let's just keep working. And besides, only about 5% of the land of Israel has been excavated. You think the evidence might be in the other 95%. So I would just say, let's just be patient and keep digging.
Wow. Yeah, this is, I don't need proof of the Bible. So when I write articles about this is the proof, but it certainly does add a whole lot more texture, a whole lot more detail to my Bible experience when I read about, oh yeah, Shilo, certainly, and this is what the altar, with the horns looked like. These are the rimonim, these are the pomegranates. It's certainly it's a science that I think adds a lot to my belief. Which is huge. I think that's really what it does for me.
Yeah, I mean, we have a natural intellectual curiosity. I think that's the way that God made us. There I go again with my presuppositions that I'm created and not evolved. But we have a natural.
We'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Okay.
You could be created and evolved. Both of them could be true.
Right. So whether it's intelligent design or however you want to look at it. I find great satisfaction by seeing those connections of my past.
Wow. I think actually we've been talking for half an hour. It goes by so fast.
I know.
I'd like to invite you back when you come, if God willing, it'll be very soon when you come to Israel. If not, we'll catch you before. I think biblical archaeology in Israel, it's not archaeology. It really walks hand in hand with Bible study these days. And you're revealing so much of the Bible. I mean, the fact that I can now look at what Shilo kind of looked like when the children of Israel were making the sacrifices there, it's huge for science and it's hugely inspirational. So I'm sorry, yes?
I was just going to say, we may be in the field another 10 years, and hopefully by another decade, we really will be able to paint a more clear picture of what it looked like.
God willing, and when they open up the Temple Mount to archaeology, I want you to be my man on the scene there.
Yeah. Amen.
I think God's going to take care of that opening up. Literally opening it up for archaeology. But
I think awesome. So. I think so. So we're going to be putting links to Dr. Stripling's. You have a site?
My personal website is scottstripling.net, And the dig website is digshilo or digshilo.org. And for anyone interested in studying Bible and archaeology, my school is thebibleseminary.org, located in Katy, Texas. We have a fully accredited archaeological program here that love people to check out.
Great. And you're actually, you can learn online with you, correct?
That's right.
I have a dear friend who actually is.
Yeah,
she's
awesome. Yeah. Send me more students like that.
Yeah, I mean, these are people, if you want to know about the Bible, sometimes you got to get your hands dirty. That's
right.
That's the way it works. So I'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Stripling. It's always amazing to talk with you. It inspires me.
Thank you.
And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us. Be blessed, y'all.
What's up tomorrow, Elio?
Tomorrow, gosh. Tomorrow is John Anderson. We're going to talk about Christians getting ready for the third temple and what Christians have to do to get ready for the third temple.
Looking forward to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.